I'm Wilson Lai,
I'm Benjamin Yap.
I'm Eli Sands.
And I'm Thanmye Lagudu.
and you're listening to Deep Cut.
Oh, I don't have the episode document open. On Deep Cut, we listen to ourselves talk. On Deep Cut, here I'm
Eli, get yourself together. We have a guest.
On Deep Cut, we compare a director's most popular film with a personal favorite chosen by one of us.
We also discuss that director's life and career to bring in context that helps us view their movies as they may want us to.
Today, we are joined by a longtime friend of the podcast and friend in real life, Thanmye Lagudu. How are you today, Thanmye? I know it's very early.
very early, 7:10 a.m. as of right now, but I'm good. I am ready for the podcast. I have a iced coffee, and really excited about today. And how's everyone else doing?
We're
Also,
good.
7
I'm
a.m.
good.
Excited to have you on.
Oh, we are all talking at once.
I am personally very excited to have you on the podcast, Thanmye, because
Agreed.
you are such a dear friend to me, and you are responsible for introducing me to the director that we are about to talk about today, Mr. Mani Ratnam, the king of Tamil cinema, of world cinema. Thanmye, do you want to introduce yourself and also talk about your relationship with Mani Ratnam?
Sure. So I am Thanmye, close friend of the podcast and avid listener of the podcast.
Yeah.
I guess professionally, I am an industry professional, I think.
He is.
Okay, thank you. So I guess my relationship with Mani Ratnam is like you'd think that he's a filmmaker that I grew up watching or whatever. That's not the case. I watched my first film of his, which was Bombay, actually, the movie that we're talking about today. First movie I watched of his was sophomore year of college, because I'd been hearing things about his filmmaking and everything, and eventually I decided to watch it. And there's something about his style, the way he told this particular story, that automatically hooked me. And I think he's made 26 films. I've seen 11 of them. I think after I watched a few of his movies, I've realized this is the filmmaker for me. This is the filmmaker that I connect with so much, because not only does he work within the Indian popular cinema format, but he finds such interesting ways to tell his stories, such evocative ways that he moves the camera, that he uses sound, and just the types of stories that he tells, and his attention to color. And obviously we'll talk about all of this when we delve into Bombay, but there was just something so I connected with it in such a personal way that I don't think I can say about that with a lot of filmmakers or a lot of filmmakers' works that I engage with. I think the first movie that I introduced or wanted Wilson to watch, I think I was maybe a little too insistent on it.
It's okay. I always am.
He deserves it.
That was Bombay, and I told Wilson, you have to watch it, and then he did, and then that's when we, as Wilson talked about, we started watching his movies with another good friend of ours, Sherwin, and I think it's been great to see everyone join the gospel of Mani Ratnam, the house, the church, bow down. He's amazing.
All hail.
And I'm just glad that people are finding the same things from his movies and feeling the same things that I did when I first started watching his movies. So that's it. I guess that's a good way to kind of sum up my relationship with him.
And also worth mentioning that Thanmye and I watched Bombay together last week.
Oh,
Yeah.
shut up!
Yeah.
Oh my God! Is that what you were holding from us? Oh my God!
Yeah.
It sucks to not be in the same place as you guys.
Yeah. Someday we will record in the same room.
Yes.
Someday. But I think going into season 2, I was feeling like I was hungry for some South Asian cinema. Ben, Thanmye, and I were in this Bollywood class in college. Shout out to Swapnil Rai, who taught us this incredible Bollywood class that really covered the base of Bollywood cinema. And then from that, I haven't been putting in a lot of work aside from watching Mani Ratnam with Thanmye and Sherwin in like building that up. But I really do feel like it, like just South Asian cinema in general is so much less regarded than like Asian cinema or European cinema when we're talking about like the American international film canon. And I really wanted to make it a point to bring in a South Asian director this season. And I feel like I wouldn't have been able to do Mani Ratnam justice. So I was very nervous too because he's such a goat, and I just really wanted to call him back up. But also especially because Ratnam's films do tend to be so much more political, and I think just that extra information and extra context is always so helpful when understanding what he's trying to do with his films.
Yeah, I think so too. And there's a few things there, right? Like aside from him kind of working in a political space, I think it's a few things. One is like, I am also not the expert on Mani Ratnam's politics and like what his political engagement in his movies. So I'm going to recognize my limitations in that. Another thing is he's also a filmmaker that I think, you watch something like Bombay and then you're like, oh, like he's really engaging with this kind of very particular event in history. But you look throughout his career and he really is a very versatile filmmaker too. He's most known for his love stories that take place in like kind of this like sociopolitically charged background or kind of historical event. But he has done like so many different types of movies. He's made like sort of Godfather-esque biopics like Nayakan. He's made like his own interpretations of like Hindu epics like Thalapathy in 1991 and Ravanan in 2010. He's also not just a filmmaker that's really versatile. He also is somebody that I think has certain aesthetic tendencies and narrative tendencies, but he's always updating his filmmaking all the time, and he's always fresh. And like you'll see something from him, and you're like, wait, I cannot believe that like a 60-something-year-old man directed this. It's like he's always reinventing himself in really such unique ways, and that's what keeps him so relevant, and that's what keeps him, I think, still incredibly respected in the Indian film industry too, or the various film industries there.
Let's do a quick director intro. So Mani Ratnam was born on June 2nd, 1956. He is an Indian director, screenwriter, and producer who works mostly in Tamil cinema. He was born into a film family. So his father was a film distributor. His uncle was a producer. Later on, his brothers became producers as well. He grew up in Chennai, which is the capital city of the Tamil Nadu state in South India. Even though growing up in a film household, he wasn't really allowed to watch movies as a child. He said in an interview that they seemed like a waste of time. But as he grew older, he went to high school, he started discovering cinema on his own and was particularly struck by the works of K. Balachander, who made very hard-hitting films with very unconventional subject matters. Later on, he also cites Kurosawa and Guru Dutt as other film director influences on him. Mani Ratnam did an MBA at an institute in Bombay and actually started to work as a management consultant, which is probably one of like the most boring jobs a film director can have before transitioning into becoming a director. And he did quickly become uninterested in the work. He said in an interview, "I didn't want to get to 40 and feel like I hadn't made the jump into filmmaking when I should have." So with the help of his producer uncle, a little bit of nepotism right there, he wrote and directed Pallavi Anupallavi in 1983, which was a critical success, but a financial flop. And that continued for a few more features until he made his fifth and sixth features, Muna Ragam and Nayakan, respectively. which was when he finally started to see his popularity as a director rise. And cut to today, he is a very popular Indian director and a nationally recognized household name. He is said to be very chill in real life, but a workhorse on set and a very precise and demanding director. And as Thanmye said earlier, has directed 26 feature films so far in his career and has one set to release next year.
Ooh.
Yeah. And I'm very excited to talk about Bombay today with all of you. But I did want to address one thing, is that we are releasing Bombay first, but it is sort of our deep cut. So this is sort of going against the grain, but I think Thanmye has a good reason for why we're approaching this in a chronological release order rather than a popular and then deep cut order.
For a few reasons, right? I think, if we look at what the next movie we're doing with Mani Ratnam, there's definitely been, this is the deep cut option, and, you guys will know what the next movie is, but another reason I think, too, is I think, and there's been a lot of, critical study of this, too, and personally, I think that, Mani Ratnam's filmmaking can kind of be split into two different phases. So Bombay was released in 1995, and then the movie that Mani Ratnam made right after was Iruvar, which is it kind of revolves around state politics, Tamil Nadu state politics, kind of focused on this friendship between two politicians. People who work in the film industry turned politicians. You can kind of split his career into two different phases, pre-Iruvar and post-Iruvar. I think it's a good way. I think it's good to start with Bombay, because I think when we talk about our next film with him, which is going to be a post-Iruvar film, we can get a kind of an idea of how his filmmaking changes. And I guess that's all I'll say. So I think, on top of this being kind of a movie that, because it was released in the Tamil film industry, has had less eyes on it. Also, it's, I think, a good way to kind of talk about his filmmaking and how it's evolved when we talk about our next film.
Should we hear more about Bombay before we start going into it?
Thanmye, do you want to take it away? I'm releasing the hosting duties.
Oh my god, so much pressure. Okay, all right, I can.
No pressure at all.
Nah, you got this.
No problem. Okay, all right. So a little bit of context for Bombay. So because it's kind of a historical fiction story, I think it's important to understand some of the real life history that I think it addresses and uses in its narrative. The movie takes place in Bombay, right, during the riots. These riots that happened in the early 1990s in Mumbai, and that started because of there was a demolition of the Barbary Masjid that happened on December 6th, 1992, and there's a whole host of political things there, but it was basically a bunch of right-wing Hindu extremists tore down this mosque, their goal was to build a temple for the god Rama. And, it was kind of one of those things where it started as a rally, and then eventually, it became more and more, violent, and then they tore down the mosque. And then that sparked a series of riots in Mumbai, in Bombay, that lasted between December 6, 1992 and January 26, 1993. And it's estimated that about 900 people died as a result of the communal violence. And it's this period of time that the second half of Bombay particularly depicts, and that's kind of the real-life historical context. So just to give you guys an idea, this movie came out in 1995, and this happened, in the latter half of 1992, 1993. So this movie was released pretty close after these things happened.
Wow.
And Mani Ratnam, he heard about these riots when he was doing the background score for his previous movie. Apparently, he was in A.R. Rahman's studio when he heard about this happening, and he said that he was really struck by this because at the time he saw Bombay as one of the most progressive cosmopolitan cities in India. And he felt that if it can happen in Bombay, it can happen anywhere. And he felt really disturbed by that. And and then I think initially he wanted to do this film as kind of like a songless movie about like a kid that gets lost in the riots. But I think because of the budget that he needed to make to like depict the riots and everything, he had to kind of increase the scope of the film. And and then when you increase the scope of the film, you kind of have to conform to the standards of like Indian popular cinema. So you had to include songs. And I guess that's kind of the genesis of how this whole thing happened. And then I have a question for you guys. How many days do you think this movie was shot in Bombay, the city?
I'm gonna do a hardball guess and say 3.
I have no idea.
Okay, I'm gonna guess that's wrong.
Someone was right on the ball right there.
That was absolutely correct.
Wait, what?
That is it. Yeah. So
Nice.
Mani
So few
Ratnam
days.
said 3 days. Shot in Bombay, the city, 3 days, and then the rest of the movie was shot in Chennai.
Whoa. Oh, what?
Yeah, isn't that insane?
Makes no sense.
That's
Yeah,
crazy.
But which parts? Because I mean, I don't know what Bombay looks like at the time, so it'll be hard for me to tell. But like, which parts were critical to be shot in Bombay?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the stuff that was shot in Bombay was like a lot of the Gateway of India stuff, like exterior. If you needed to see like really like the
Right.
landmarks of Bombay, like that stuff was shot there. But then like the actual riots and the rest of it was shot in Chennai. And Mani Ratnam talks about it in an interview. He's basically like, it just made more economic sense to do it there because in Bombay, like filmmaking is a lot more difficult to get like the permits, and it's a lot slower. And he said just shooting it in Chennai just made more economic sense at the time.
Because they can kind of build all those sets and start fires and all that.
Right.
My gosh. Those scenes are insane.
Yeah.
Like,
the scale of those scenes.
The scale
it
of the
gets
scenes.
crazy.
Yeah.
It really gets
I told Thanmye when we watched, like, it looks like one of the most expensive movies I've seen.
Yeah.
Just
And
like
it's probably
yeah,
not.
definitely.
And
It
he
probably
said,
is
just
not.
wait for Dilse. So,
Oh.
Yeah.
he said just wait for next week's movie.
Yeah. Just wait for next week's movie. So just to kind of close out the context part of it, this movie, when it was prepping for release, faced a lot of issues with the Indian censor board, and like, Mani Ratnam talks about like, at the end of the day, like about a minute and a half of the movie was cut. But part of that was he had shot a scene where he showed the demolition of the mosque. Like he shot the whole thing, but the censor board wouldn't let him put that scene in the movie. So he had to instead, I think you guys saw it in the movie, where he had to do this kind of like montage with newspaper headlines and photographs. And he, I think he talks about how he regrets not being able to use the footage that he shot because he said, quote, "Our version was much more emotional, a wail more than anything else. This was like a factual statement." So I guess, that's something we could talk about, how that sequence kind of fits in, and then kind of the censorship that kind of caused that part to kind of change and stuff. And so the movie was released in March 10th of 1995 to a lot of controversy and a lot of anger from Hindu and Muslim fundamentalist groups. The film was banned in Singapore and Malaysia.
Shout out.
Yeah, represent.
Well done.
Yeah. I mean, it was so crazy that like in India, like police were stationed at the screenings of the film, just to make sure that nothing breaks out. And it got to a point where the controversy got to a point where like Mani Ratnam was impacted personally. And so like to the point where like in July 1995, a group of people threw 2 bombs at Mani Ratnam while he was in his house trying to have his morning coffee. He got shrapnel injuries in his leg and had to be rushed to the hospital, and he stayed there for a while. And then which is crazy. Like I didn't even know about that. Like this was me just like doing the research, and I found out about it, and I was like, oh my god, like it's real. Like you know what I mean? Like he really like risked his life to make this movie. Like in a way. And despite all the controversy, the film became a critical and commercial success. Yeah, and I guess that kind of closes out the context portion of it.
I have a question, which hopefully this doesn't run too long in the context section, but because the religious conflict or tension between Hindu and Muslim communities in India is still kind of a hot button issue in a sense in India, even especially today still, when you have Hindu nationalists. I don't know too many details about the context, but it is definitely still an issue that is a part of India today. Like, does the film have any place in that conversation still, or do we not know?
And people have kind of talked about, I think its relevance is still pretty, to what's going on right now. The relevance is still there. I think it still is particularly impactful for a lot of people when they watch it today because of what's going on in India right now, and how this kind of tension between those communities has been stoked by, what is right now like a right-wing government in India, Yeah, so I think it still, I think that's what has made it endure, and I think that's what, its impact is still there for people who watch it today, because I think the issue has not gone away, and then now, like, there are certain academic circles in India who have, I think, criticized this movie for not going far enough and condemning Hindu nationalists and the police in their roles in the riots. But that those are also like debates that people have been having and talking about. But I think for a lot of people, like I said, like it still hits home, and it still reminds them of things that are happening right now.
Yeah,
I mean, considering the censorship, I feel like if it tried to go any harder on those fronts, it probably would have been cut anyway.
Well, aside from the destruction of the mosque sequence being cut by censors, a piece of context that you sent us, an interview with Ratnam, mentioned that there was a scene cut that involved a police officer accidentally shooting a woman doing laundry. And according to Ratnam, that sequence was cut because the censors didn't want a depiction of police killing civilians, even accidentally.
Yeah.
And he adds in the interview, even if it happens all the time.
Yeah.
That tracks. Makes sense. I understand film censors. We have one too.
So Ben and Eli, what do you guys think of this movie? It was both your first time, both your first Ratnam films.
Yeah, it is my first Ratnam film. I think off the bat, the first thing I would say is there are certain shots and scenes which are quite awe-inspiring. Especially the early song and dance numbers look incredible. And I think for me, the MVP here is, aside from the music, is the cinematography, which is just insane. Like part of that also feeds into feeling like this is one of the most expensive movies ever made. And I mean, I've seen Bollywood films, and it kind of, like, I guess this is under Kollywood, which is Tamil musical cinema, right?
Yes.
But I guess there's some similarities there. But here, the musical numbers remind me of those big Bollywood ones, but this kind of inventiveness and the color and the choreography is incredible in those song and dance sequences. And then you have the flip side, which is the extremely intense war zone scenes in the second half when they're shooting the reenactments of the riots. And that stuff is crazy because of the human scale and scope that they have, like the number of extras they have, the way that the camera moves through those streets, which are, I guess, reconstructed from in Chennai, and the number of explosions and fire and people running in the streets, and it just looks like hell to shoot. And I definitely audibly was like, whoa. A few times I was like, whoa, well, did they do all this in the shot? And so I think a lot of my appreciation for film is in its construction and the way that it's made. Like there, it probably required so much work and effort to be able to create these scenes, whether it's the precise and wild choreography of the song and dance, or the really, like, I don't know, man, like the amount of footage you have to shoot for that as well, and the amount of cutting that they're doing, where like you have song and dance sequences which are essentially montages where they're creating scenes that we never really return to and kind of becoming like their own music videos. So he kind of has to create so many different setups and ideas to create the entire tapestry of the movie. Yeah. And so, I mean, kudos to that. I mean, that's just a lot. Yeah.
And it's usually something that happens very, like, commonly in Bollywood, where the scope is so wide. But with Bombay, the scope is wide, but the central idea and the central story is still so crystal clear to us as a viewer, and I'm sure to Ratnam as a director and screenwriter, that you never really lose track or lose your way. Everything that is presented to you has emotional or narrative importance.
I was thinking about this, and I was thinking in hindsight, the musical numbers seem so strange or out of place in hindsight, especially when I'm thinking of the musical number where he asks her for a daughter, right? Which in hindsight seems a little out of place, but then in watching it, it didn't feel out of place because of the fact that he places it in there as an expression of their kind of domestic bliss or something. But that's this very fun, colorful song sequence that occurs very shortly before the riots really kick in. And somehow that is able to feel organic to the flow of it, even though on paper it seems a bit but I think because he is weaving the investment in the central romance and obviously the use of great songs that help you understand what he's using the songs for. Because clearly he wasn't necessarily planning to make something with songs in it, but then he had to figure out a way that he could put these songs in and not make them feel out of place within the larger context of the movie and the political themes and messages he wanted to put across.
First of all, my viewing experience itself was really fun because I got to watch with Thanmye and get a little bit of context going in, and also just lean over and say, what? How is he doing this? It's exactly what Ben's saying about the camera movement and the color. Technically, the thing that I'm coming away most impressed by is the blocking of both actors and camera. Whether it's one person, two people, four people, a dance number, a crowd, Ratnam is able to stage actors within the frame so incredibly effectively, also for a range of purposes. Whether he wants to go more fanciful in the dance numbers or more down-to-earth documentary style in the riot sequences, whether he wants you to feel emotional intimacy between the main couple, whether he wants you to have critical distance for the fathers arguing. It's like any purpose, any number of people, Ratnam can stage it. And it's incredible to watch. The thing that I'm probably a little bit stuck on or not sure how to fully digest is that I'm totally emotionally convinced by this movie. I'm always moved by a family epic that takes place over multiple years. But I don't think I fully understand or know how to logically place the mixing of sentiment and real life violence. This is something that I come up against time and time again in movies. I've had this conversation with both Ben and Wilson off mic many times.
All the time, yeah.
Yeah.
And I understand also through some of the articles that Thanmye sent us that it's maybe not perfectly accurate, but some viewers in the movie might argue, well, it doesn't have to be. And the overall message that it wants to send is more important. But then you read in an interview that Ratnam doesn't want this to be a message film. And I'm not sure where to place it exactly based on what Ratnam thinks, what critics think, what viewers in context in both time and place thought, and what we should think now in 2021 in different parts of the world.
Yeah. Here's the thing about Ratnam is saying in an interview that he doesn't want he doesn't want to send messages with his movies or send political messages with his movies. Anne Hui, who's one of my favorite directors, who makes really, really political movies, says the exact same thing whenever she is asked about what political messaging she's trying to put across with her filmmaking. And I think it's just a way for these directors to sort of
CYA.
What is CYA?
Cover your ass.
Yes. Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a thing. I mean, I think they're smart about. I mean, how is this man saying this isn't a message movie when his final song literally says something that is a message to have two religious communities just come together and stop fighting? That's literally what it says in the song itself, in its lyrics. And I think it's odd to have him say that. But I think once you see that he has to say that, then it kind of makes sense. Like his message is clear, no matter what he says. Doesn't matter what he says. In the end, the text of the movie is self-evident. But I think I'm somewhat with you, Eli, about the merging of sentiment and real world violence. I think in the riot scenes, there was some discomfort in watching them, wondering how, because he goes really far in the depiction of violence and the depiction of the damage that the violence does. And we're kind of in agreement of like Ratnam working in a sort of melodramatic mode where there's a lot of intensity, whether it's emotion or situation. And so here the violence is extreme, and it is extreme in reality as well. So seeing the dead bodies and everything. So there's a difference between like extreme in actuality and extreme in terms of what you show, right? Mm-hmm. And so part of me was a bit pushing back a little bit, thinking, like, do I need to see the rooms of dead bodies to have this movie sell me that this is a terrible real life event? And then of course the question would be, what is the point of showing me the brutality and the gruesome violence? Like that's a big question. Like why do this? Okay, it's not saying that I'm not saying we shouldn't do it, but then there has to be a question of why do it? What is the purpose of using that amount of sensationalism to push your story, right? Or to push your emotion, right? And I think I found it tough because at the end, what happens is Shekhar and Chanel Banu are reunited with their sons. And it is an earnest, optimistic kind of messaging, right? That we can find possible reconciliation between these two communities. But it was a bit confusing because then you have the reunion of a family unit to somehow stand for the hopeful reconciliation of two religious communities. And I'm not sure if that entirely connects for me as a way to sell his supposed non-message of religious reconciliation. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure if the family necessarily symbolizes that for me watching it. Although, yes, it's a union between a Muslim and Hindu family. At the end, the kind of final note is a reunion of parent and child, right? Mm. Yeah, so it doesn't work necessarily for me in that sense.
Well, like the beginning of the film, like both, like the characters of Shekhar and Shaila Banu are sort of err on the side of less religious, even like compared to their fathers,
right?
Who do most of the pushing in either direction in the first half of the movie. When I'm thinking about that ending, it is sending like powerful messaging through the lyrics, and I guess it is very emotional because it is these kids getting reunited to their parents. But by that point, I'm not really seeing like the Muslim and the Hindu forces are represented in like the wife and the husband of this family and these two kids who are named after their Muslim and Hindu grandfathers.
I also am less hung up on the symbolism of the main family. I actually think that they have pretty nice specific characterization. I'm thinking about factual representation. I think when it comes to depicting real life atrocity in film, it varies case by case what the responsibility to historical accuracy is. But looking at the articles that Thanmye sent us, something that comes up is it accurately reflecting who is responsible for what parts of the violence? And some critics would say, well, you don't have to go into numbers and who's responsible. And Ratnam, had to work within the confines of censors and industry standards and what a popular reaction would be.
Yeah.
And also, it sounds like from some of the articles that there is a both sides take to the movie. Am I understanding that correctly, Thanmye? Like, I wasn't fully sure from the articles how to interpret where Bombay lands on historical accuracy, or even if it should be responsible as fully as possible. It is not a documentary. On the other hand, film is very literal, and it can stand as the truth for many people, as, say, Schindler's List is the representation of the Holocaust for many Americans in a way that I personally am uncomfortable with.
And especially when this is made so close to the events themselves, right? That it could be said to be commenting on contemporary issues, right? And it could have an effect on those contemporary issues, right?
That's the thing that a lot of people, I think, this is my second time watching the movie. The first time I watched it, I was absolutely like consumed by it. I thought, Matt, this is amazing, and like this. I wasn't really thinking about at the time the blending of sentiment and sort of reinterpreting historic, real trauma, like real stuff, that I wasn't thinking about it at that time, the first time I watched it. But this time, I think that came into and maybe it's just me, kind of growing as a film viewer and just kind of thinking about those things. And that was also something that I had to kind of think about. And the way I see it, right, like it's this like both sides argument. It's not about like the politics. It's about like, for him, I think it's like the violence itself, right? And that's kind of like what he thinks is like this senseless violence and all this rioting. It's not necessarily like he empathizes with one side or empathizes with the other side. It's that I think he looks at the violence and the destruction itself, and he's like, this is not right. But at the same time, that kind of feels like a cop-out, right? Because we talk a lot about like systemically, right? Like, how do we prevent stuff like this from happening, right? That it feels like, to me, this, when I was watching it, that it's like, because in the movie, there is some talk about like, most of the people who died were Muslims, which is true, right? During these riots. There is a little bit of, there's this scene with Shekhar and one of the police officers, played by Prakash Raj. They're walking down the hall, and this scene was interesting because it feels like, because Shekhar's a journalist and he's asking these questions, and then the policeman says, he says something to the effect of like, you guys will cry about police brutality, but then when we don't do anything, you'll criticize the police. And that thing, and when he said that, I was like, but that's not the issue. That's not, you know what I mean? That's not it, right? That's like that's not the right equivalence, right? So I think,
also beautifully shot scene.
Yeah, great scene. Really well shot. And again, I'm not an expert at this stuff. The type of gaze that he has as kind of an upper caste Hindu, it feels like this, like, oh, look at all this violence. It's senseless, and it's like extremists on both sides, and then, it's politicians stoking up extremism. And I think it maybe, it'll work for this kind of like mainstream film, right? And it did, because the film was successful. It was a commercial success. But I think it's, at least like with time, to me, it kind of feels like a cop-out a little bit. So that's definitely something I was thinking about. I mean, I think on a filmmaking formal level, right? And I think the film still works for me on that level. But once you start getting into like his engagement with the politics, his engagement with the time, things start to get a little thorny for me too.
I can sort of buy the argument that you kind of have to Trojan horse messaging into something like this. Because at the end of the day, he's trying to make popular cinema. You have songs and everything, and he's trying to draw viewers
and that's exactly what he does with the narrative, right? Like, you start out, you have no clue that by the halfway mark of this movie, you will be at a real life historical event that happened 3 years ago if you saw this the year of release. So he's sort of like baiting you with this love story that sort of transforms into something that, like, if you are a cinema goer at the time, is still very like fresh and emotional for you as well. And I think if you think about it like that in a popular cinema like mindset, it sort of makes sense to me why he decided to do that, especially being a filmmaker who is already very well regarded at this point. Like, there was no way that, or not no way, but I think that it would have been very hard for him to make a movie that would have not angered a lot of people.
And just to kind of add to that a little bit, Wilson, this is why I get into this thing, because it's like, I think about the time that it was made, right? I think about what his goals were and trying to reach the number of people that he wanted to reach with the film. And it was like, and the fact that he, it was still pretty progressive for its time in its portrayal of, like, at least in India, for this Hindu man and this kind of interfaith marriage. Mm-hmm. And the fact that, it stoked up enough fervor that he went to the hospital because people threw bombs at him, and I think about that and I'm like, and his goals, and I'm like, well, okay, like, for the time, I guess this was the kind of movie that he wanted to make. And it reached a lot of people, and, it did impact a lot of people and made them think about these things. And, that's the thing, right? Like, when I think about those two things, and I'm always trying to weigh those two, because, like, these arguments that we have for the kind of engagement that he has is something that's come up with time, right? But at the time, it was kind of a new thing. It was kind of a really forward-thinking thing at the time.
Yeah, this is where it is important to take a movie on its own terms in its context, to not judge with our sense of morality in the present. And also, this is where form comes back in, because in one of those interviews, Ratnam says that he's going for a, quote, cry of agony, end quote. And I think it absolutely succeeds on those terms.
Definitely.
Whether or not we think those terms are the correct way to go about depicting something that really happened, it is so effectively emotional. And again, like, I think the family is a good, solid foundation. And the first half of the movie and getting us on board with their romance is a really effective way to, as Wilson's saying, Trojan horse in the idea that stop violence.
And what a beautiful and exquisite way to Trojan horse you in. Like, honestly, if this movie never went to Bombay and just stayed in the village the entire time, I would not have minded, because I don't know, just all the stuff that was shot in the village is just so incredibly powerful and so moving. Like, just from the first time that Shekhar sees Shaila Banu at the port and her veil comes out and the musical theme comes in. I remember the first time I saw this movie, like, I was sitting in my room and I paused and I was like, what the fuck is about to happen?
It's like 1 minute into the movie.
It really is. It's crazy. And also, the guy who plays Shekhar, what's his name?
Arvind
Swamy. Not your like Shah Rukh Khan, not your typical hot leading Bollywood man. And I, like, was really surprised that, I guess, Mani, like, stuck to this, or, like, I don't know, chose him and stuck to him as a viable romantic lead. But he gives such a powerful performance, doing so many things, like, in love, like, very committed, and then, like, despair, and that, like, the whole range of emotions he delivers with such conviction, and I believe it. I believe him in every scene that he's in.
It's such smart casting, because he's not the typical chiseled Shah Rukh Khan kind of guy, and that makes him something of an underdog who you want to see win. And also, when he is an incredible dancer and an incredible actor and can really, like, chew up the scenery, it feels like, like, he's winning. And he has a great mustache.
Yes.
I have to say, though, I mean, as a person who doesn't personally go for melodramatic stories usually, I think that was my first. Wait. Usually,
Don't fucking lie.
chill. No, but I think
I won't chill.
Chill. The only resistance I really had to the movie was at the beginning when I was like, okay, I'm supposed to buy this right now, and I think that was the first thing I was like, okay, I think I just need to buy it. I gotta gloss over because like you said, there's no. This happens a minute into the movie. It's a love at first sight kind of thing where literally they see each other and they're both madly in love, and personally couldn't buy it right there.
When did
And
you buy it? Well, at what
Okay,
point? At what point in the film? Yeah.
When did I submit myself to Bombay? I think that first one I was like, okay. When he first see each other, I was like, okay, I know what the movie is trying to signal to me, that this is a love at first sight moment, but I didn't really understand because I was like not sure what exactly is going on. And the first musical number, which is with Shino Banu, where she's singing in that white dress and presumably she's at some sort of wedding, looks incredible. And like you said, this guy's not Shah Rukh Khan. I was like, oh, okay, this guy was like my first initial reaction.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but like I was like, okay, this is I could sort of understand the vibe, like the other way that he sees her and like is immediately smitten, but then it was the other way around first. I was like, okay. And I was like, okay, fine. But I think my struggle with that first song sequence is that was one-sided, right? And so the movie hadn't sold me on whether this guy was viable, as you say, Wilson. You know, I hadn't seen him sing and dance yet. So the movie really had to get me there first. But then the fourth sequence comes in and then it just goes full on with the rain and the wind. There's so much wind in this movie.
Incredible
The elements
of emotion.
The elements.
So I was like, okay, fine. I'll do it. I'll go with this. But I think where it really sold it for me is when the movie got really horny with...
After they got married?
Yeah, after they got married. Because I was like, that's really where you finally get to see them interact together. Because before that, it was a proclamation of love and an asking from the parents that they wanted to get married, but you didn't really get to see them interact so much. A lot of it was Shekhar chasing her, but she was being very coy and like not quite sure about him, but even though she already internally has sang that she loves him, but only when they get married and then things can get heated, that's when the chemistry really comes in, and then you get to see Shekhar's flirting with her and also with some other women a little bit. But that's kind of where his sex appeal and his charm comes in. And that's when I really fully bought that relationship between them. I mean, that's kind of the power of song and dance, I guess. And that horny sequence is pretty good. And there's a lot going in there with the montage during that musical sequence where he has so many different situations that they're in. And there's this gag that they have to share the room with a bunch of boys. And then there's this great shot of him talking to her using those kids as the telephone between them as they line out. And then he calls back to that in the later scene when they use their own twin sons. And that's just a beautiful, sweet callback moment.
Great. This conversation that we're having about Arvind Swami's, like, I don't know, viableness as a romantic lead is hilarious considering what movie we're discussing next week.
Okay. I'm not ready to be okay.
And then, we're talking about Arvind Swami, but I think we also have to recognize how, like, amazing Manisha Koirala is.
Oh, yeah.
I love her so much.
Yeah, she is just so good, and especially during this watch, you see the way that like Mani Ratnam like ends a lot of his scenes, and he ends it on Manisha Koirala. Like there's like a few extra seconds you see of her, like, and you're just like, she's like one of the greatest actresses ever. Like I don't know, and then and she like in this she has such range, and the scene where I think she's like amazing in is when she tells Shekhar she's pregnant, but she doesn't say, like, you'd never hear it, right? How she, like, expresses it to him, like, and how the way that the whole scene is constructed, right? Like, the pressure cooker goes off, he comes in, and then she whispers it to him, and then she, like, directs his hand to, and then the song starts playing, and you're just like, this is amazing. And you see her face and like her joy, and it's just like, yeah, it's like next level. I was like, this is amazing, and not just like the scene itself, but the way Manisha like encompasses this character so fully, and the nuances that she gives, and like when Mani decides to hold on her face, and like lets these expressions kind of play out for another 3, 4, 5 seconds, and that just like makes all the difference.
Personally, watching this, the relationship that I feel like I had the most emotional reaction to is actually between the two fathers.
Dad talk.
Personally, because I think that's where the movie got me the most, more so than the romantic stuff. And I think that's where the religious stuff really injects this movie with a lot more power. And there's a lot of feeling there because you start with such intensity between the two families where they're literally going to kill each other. And for a lot of the movie, they seriously hate each other's guts and they're really just trying to get each other and like piss the other one off. And I think this is where the marriage of Shayla Banu and Shekhar is most successful because of the union and the kids, and how the kids are the reason the fathers kind of make good with each other. And there's this great comic moment when Shayla Banu's dad comes and then Shekhar's dad dresses them up immediately in like Hindu garbs, but it's not played as something aggressive, but somehow played as something comic, which I found really interesting, because if this scene had happened like 20 minutes ago in the movie, it would maybe have had an explosive ending. But here, and the way that he frames it and the way that the scene plays out, he draws a comic energy out of it, which is really interesting and successful, that gives you a sense that these two are going to start making up soon and becoming more respectful of each other.
One of the things about camera blocking that I wanted to circle back on is that the framing and how far he places actors from the camera with the fathers specifically is so important, because earlier in the movie, when it's all about violence and the fathers are dead set against each other, against this marriage, all the actors are placed very far away from the frame. So you see essentially the full, from head to toe, bodies of the fathers as they're in the scenes that they're in, when they're being obstinate. As the movie progresses and they get closer to accepting the marriage and becoming more like brothers, the fathers, they move closer to the camera. The first time that you get a close-up, like extreme close-up on Shekhar's father's face, is when he's hugging his grandsons, okay? And I think part of what cues you into the emotional trajectory of the fathers, as Ben's saying, in this moment of comedy, is the distance from the camera. It's so smart what Ratnam is doing with how he places actors in relation to the camera to tell you the story, the arc.
Another scene I think about too when you talk about distance to the camera is the scene when Nasser's character, Shekhar's father, he is, I think the two grandsons are sleeping, and then Shaila Banu like talks to him and like is basically like, "Are you here to separate us?" And you get a lot of like close-ups there of him, and then that was when I was watching the movie when I realized, oh, like the coverage has been kind of from a distance, for a while, and now we get this really emotional moment, and that's the scene where we realize he's not there to separate them. He has made his peace with their union, right? And like that scene was really powerful because of, like you said, Eli, the decision, that specific decision to get in on the close-up with the dad, and in a way kind of sets us up a little bit when we start to connect with their union for their tragic death when their house gets bombed later. And it's like, that's when you start seeing them getting along is when the external world happens, and that's like the tragedy of it.
You also have that scene when Shekhar's father is with the two sons and they're confronted by a mob of Muslim people who are asking them what their names are and like where they're from. And then you have Shaila Banu's dad coming around and then saving them, essentially telling them that, these people are okay. And you have that line, and I think this is where the movie really got me, which is when Shaker's father asks, "What do you say?" and the guy says, "I told him you're my brother." And then he cuts to this kind of sort of almost over the shoulder shot ish of Sheila Banu's dad. And before that, the shot's mostly two shot, pretty wide, where you see the kids. But then you end on this shot of Sheila Banu's dad saying, "You're my brother," and there's this closeness to it. And then you kind of adopt Shaker's father's perspective in a sense, that he finally sees this person as an equal. It's hard to explain without really watching the scene, but like immediately you feel that. You feel going from distance to I'm here with you, and I feel your connection with this other person. This relationship is powerful because of how intense and antagonistic it starts, and then it comes here where there's this mutual understanding. And I think this is where his message is most successful, really, and maybe the more stealthy one of the ways that he's trying to bring his message across.
But there's so many instances just throughout the film where Ratnam like chooses within a scene like one specific moment to highlight in a certain way. If it is not like a close up or like a little musical flair or like a camera move that really just, it's just sort of like that out of body like feeling that you get, that it's sort of indescribable, or like when you're watching a movie and you're like, oh shit, it's taking me there. And how Ratnam is able to hold back and then like fully give it to you, regardless of what he's trying to sell, like romance or destruction or whatever. The just such a precise control of when he wants to let you in and hold you back. And it sorry, I'm doing this thing with my hands.
No, I'll explain why I did that.
And he does it so well to keep it manages to keep you emotionally engaged throughout the whole film.
Scene by scene, he's so good with scene construction. I'm thinking about how in a few musical numbers, the editing pace will be pretty regular, going along with the beat rhythmically, and then a point in the song comes, both in the scene where Shaila Banu is at a marriage and during the fort scene, the climax of both songs is a oneer. In the earlier one, it's just the camera pushing in on Shaila Banu as she's singing, and Shekhar comes up behind her and is looking at her. And in the fort with the waves, it's this incredibly cathartic shot where they're finally united. Shekhar's at this fort because he's waiting for Shaila Banu to appear to profess her love, and she finally arrives. They're finally united, and boom, the camera starts circling around them like 7 times.
Yeah.
It's great.
And it's like reading.
It's exactly what Wilson's saying about a scene will be going along, and it'll be normal, and then boom, he'll give you what you're looking for. He'll give you the catharsis, and it's massive. And I think that's part of not just the physical scale of how many people and how much money you're seeing on screen, but the emotional scale of what he can hit you with is so large.
I think his skill set as a filmmaker is very diverse because he goes so bombastic and also sometimes and also so small sometimes. And a reason I did this sweeping motion, Wilson, when you were doing that, is that I want to tell you my favorite shot in this film, which is one of the smaller ones. And it's the scene where Shekhar
everyone just perked up, like Thanmye's nodding.
Like he gets the letter from his dad, and then Shaila Banu goes into the kitchen, and there is this piece of the set, which is 2 swinging doors with window glass panes, and one pane is knocked out. And it's been there the whole time, right? And so you have Shekhar reading the letter, and then she walks into the kitchen, and those 2 doors start swinging, and you have him in the middle, and the shot's just staying on him. It's swinging, and once it stops swinging, he leans over into that missing glass pane. And it sounds strange, and it's hard to explain why it has this effect, but like for me, those swinging panes created a sense of tension and distance between the two of them, and it's just nice to look at when he leans over in the thing. But it feels like it's creating separation between them, like physically and literally, and you feel like this letter could be a thing that could be pulling them apart, and it is a thing that Shaker is afraid will pull them apart, which is a cruel thing that his father says about his wife. And that is something exceptionally intelligent, novel, and I've never seen it before.
To put what Ben's saying another way, a lot of the shots and techniques are things that draw my attention to the ingenuity of Ratnam, but also have story purpose.
Right. And one of the shots I think that really got me, and I think we remarked about this when we watched it together, Eli. So it's later in the movie. I think Kamal is looking for his brother, and Ratnam does this amazing Steadicam shot. Him and shout out to his cinematographer Rajiv Menon, who's like an amazing DP.
Yes.
He does this Steadicam shot where it's Kamal looking for his brother. And it's like going through this, it's like gliding through the streets, and then it's him hiding in specific places. And then you see like what I presume is the Indian army, trying to control. They're just like marching through the streets, and it's like so amazingly staged and so like specifically blocked that I was just like, this is like what the power of like a one shot is, right? It's not like, because I think in a lot of movies, we'll see a oneer and we'll be like, oh, that's impressive technique wise, right? But it does nothing for me, right? At least for me, right? It's like, okay, like cool, we'll talk about like 1917 or whatever, like, oh, awesome, you shot, it looks like one take, great. But but with this one, it's
great,
like,
good job.
but with
Cool
this,
shot,
it's like Eli, you were talking about, it's like the ingenuity of it, but also the helplessness. You feel like the helplessness of this kid trying to find his brother, and you get the scale, and then you see like the Indian army, and you're just like, wow, like I like Ratnam is so effective in making you empathize for this kid who's just trying to look for his brother, but he does it in such an ingenious way with this oneer, in a way that I think that, and back to what Ben was saying, like is this very diverse set of tools that he has, right? He's not a one-trick pony. He won't just use the one take and that's it, right? He has such a diverse set of tools, and that was definitely one of them. But it's always towards a story purpose. It's always towards putting the viewer in a specific place, or making you empathize with the character.
Yeah.
Do y'all think Chivo looked at this when he did?
For Children of Men, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
One of the things that Maya and I talked about when we watched, like, Cuaron had to have seen this movie, right?
Definitely.
Because it's and this was
there.
first.
That's the blueprint. That is the blueprint. And like even earlier in the film, he uses that oneer in the scene where the couple think they're alone in the apartment for the first time, so they like try. They're just like trying to like have space to like make out. But then the kids keep on coming through the apartment, and it is such a masterfully choreographed one take, but to deliver like a comical, like, I don't know, outcome to the viewer. And it's just like you said, he is not a one trick pony.
Should we talk about music? But I don't know what else to say about music.
Oh yeah,
because it's just it's good.
Yeah, A.R. Rahman is the GOAT. Yeah, he's the best.
Yeah, this is amazing. And like the theme for Bombay, that like the instrumental that he made is like, it's just genius. Like it's just so good. It just like encompasses everything that the movie is trying to get across musically. And obviously like the songs are great. Some facts about the soundtrack: it sold over 15 million units when it came out. So it's one of the highest selling Indian albums ever. And this, along with Rahman's album for Roja, which was his debut album with Mani Ratnam, they kind of launched Rahman into becoming like a mainstream film composer, especially like the 1-2 punch of Roja and Bombay. It's kind of what made people see that he was like a really talented composer. And then the rest is history. Now he has 2 Oscars. Now he's
thanks to Ratnam.
Although one of his Oscars is for Slumdog Millionaire. So.
Yeah. Yeah,
Maybe that's a conversation for another day.
That is a conversation for another time. Yes.
Danny Boyle deep cut when?
Hopefully never, but we'll
never.
Whoa.
Sorry,
Danny.
Danny Doyle.
I have to say I really like I guess you could say hip hop infused number.
Oh yeah,
I really like that one, and I really like the choreography of that. Mm-hmm. It's like maybe the most out of place one, but I don't know. I dug it. I like a lot of the horny parts of this. I don't know why.
Yeah,
maybe it's a state of mind, Ben.
Maybe I was very tired.
Well, the thing with that song sequence too is that like you get the idea, like when we're talking about censorship too, right? Like the purpose of the song is like, right, they're trying to show that they're having sex, right? They're going to consummate their marriage or whatever, right? That's kind of what they're trying to do. And Ratnam, he can't just like have a sex scene, that's like, he can't do that for the kind of movie that he's making and, and kind of like, in this Indian popular cinema format. So he has to think like, oh, right, like I can do it with this very horny dance number, and this great song. And it like cuts between that the two dancers and them kind of like kind of really intimate moments.
I remember the name for what it was called. It's called an item number. Sorry, I was trying to remember it from when we were.
Yes.
What does that mean? What do you mean?
Ben, we were in the same class. You should know what this is.
Oh, what does it mean? I'm sorry. College is a long time ago.
An item number is a sort of a staple in Bollywood cinema where it's sort of like a musical number that's inserted into a film that may or may not really have much relevance to the plot. So it has singers, dancers that probably like don't show up again in the movie. And it's sort of just to like sell more songs for the soundtrack and like help market the film. Yeah, so then you do have like singers or stars that just frequently show up in different item numbers. But the fact that this item number was like specifically made for that point in the movie and just to serve that story beat already makes this stand out from a lot of other Bollywood films.
Yeah, it doesn't feel too out of place. Yeah. It's fun, and it's also in the same vein of how Ratnam has been depicting their inching towards finally consummating their marriage. It's fun.
So guys, what are your final thoughts on Bombay?
It was really such a joy to revisit this film because it was my first Ratnam film, and sort of going down his filmography was so... It's such a diverse filmography, even though he's really knocking it out of the park every film that I see. It was really comforting to return to this movie and to really rediscover what I loved about his filmmaking. I guess I'm really attuned to filmmakers who try to merge political elements into their films or like are trying to say something with their movies politically, and I think that was really powerful for me, and it really continues throughout. I think if there is a common thread with Ratnam's movies is that they are mostly political, and I don't know, guys. I'm such a sucker for a telephoto lens and a cinemascope frame. There is just really no other way to get me. Oh, no. Well, yeah, there are very few ways to get me to instantly fall in love with a movie than to use a widescreen frame with a telephoto lens. So, yeah, that's how I'm going to end.
I had a lot of fun watching with Thanmye, and it's a great movie. I'm just so impressed by the scale. I'm impressed by Ratnam's filmmaking. I'm impressed by the performances. And I'm really looking forward to watching our next movie.
I think I come away from Bombay being pretty floored by the amount that Ratnam is able to show on display here, like what he can do. Especially when we're thinking about this being made with certain expectations, right? As a mainstream popular film, and the way he's going to bat with every scene and like really trying and doing really different and impressive and diverse ways of covering different scenes. And I think that's the thing that I'm still a little in awe of. And I'm pretty excited for our next movie because I've heard good things about it. So I'm trying to see how this guy pushes to the next level. Especially when he has Shah Rukh Khan.
Yes. That's a hint. I guess some of my final thoughts would just be like, I'm so glad that you guys have, again, joined the House of Ratnam, the church, my church here. And no, but seriously, I'm glad that you guys enjoyed and are share in Wilson and I's like appreciation for this filmmaker and what he does and just like, yeah, I'm just glad that you guys liked it. I was a little bit like, oh, Ben's not gonna like it,
especially with Ben.
I was like, Ben's not gonna like this, and I'm just glad that things worked out, and and that
worked out.
Yeah, and then
I hate the next one. You never know.
We'll see. But yes, I think even the first time I watched it, it's a tough watch, right? It's a great film, but it's a tough watch, especially towards the end. And this time revisiting it really was also it was really rewarding because I got to pick up on like small things that he does, and just kind of having seen more of his films, that he made in the 2000s and later in the 90s, just going back to this and seeing where he is as a filmmaker, what he'll turn into as a filmmaker, and also like the kind of priorities that he has later, and the different things that he's doing later in his later films. So the next movie we're going to be talking about is Mani Ratnam's first Bollywood film that he made, and I guess something to know and to note is that this is his biggest budget, right? On top of that, it is a movie that I think has a very different kind of audience experience. It is, and something else, and even though his films are political, it is, I find, very difficult to nail down Mani Ratnam's politics. I know that's hard to say. That's kind of a weird thing to say, but I think just prepare for, the movie to be a different kind of viewing experience.
Thank you for bringing your knowledge and expertise, Thanmye.
Thank you, and
thank you so much, Thanmye.
Thank you for evangelizing us.
Yes, we've you're in the water. The baptism has all this stuff, baptism, and yes,
hot in here.
Yes, and thank you guys for bringing me onto the podcast and allowing me to, talk about Mani Ratnam, which is basically what I do all the time anyway. But now I'm doing it on a podcast, so I guess it's like official.
And it'll live on forever.
Yes.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Deep Cut. Please rate and review because that helps us keep making the show. Be sure to subscribe to us where you listen to the podcast. Be sure to subscribe to us where you listen to podcasts so you'll know when our next episode drops. You can give us a follow on Twitter and Instagram at DeepCutPod. Join us to talk about movies on our Discord server, to which you'll find a link in the description. Thank you to Justina Yam for our beautiful artwork. I'm Wilson.
I'm Ben.
I'm Eli.
And I'm Thanmye.
Take care, and we're looking forward to talking about more movies with you next time.
Yeah.
Shaila Banu.